Hey, afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the great Zoya for that interview with Dan Jorgensen. Today we're going to be delving a bit more into these sort of more policy aspects of this sort of, this broader discussion about energy prices, which has obviously pre-existed the current more urgent debate, following what we're seeing in Iran. So one big sort of point of tension is this disagreement between people who say that the Iran energy, I don't want to call it a crisis yet, let's call it a panic. But the panic has sort of, it's demonstrated just how important it has been to invest in renewables over the last 20 years, but over the last 4 years as well, since the the energy crisis triggered by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So on the one hand, you have people saying, they're vindicated by this. They're saying this shows the importance of renewables. It shows already the fact that there are, significantly fewer supply constraints in a lot of countries, especially Spain, for instance. It shows that renewables, investing in renewables and building out, other sources of electricity power generation, including nuclear, are the way forward in the long term. But then there are other actors or interests saying the opposite. They're saying that really this demonstrates that we shouldn't have abandoned fossil fuels, or at least producing them locally. We shouldn't have cut off, we shouldn't have stopped drilling in the North Sea. We shouldn't have even cut off, as Jorgensen, Jorgensen really ruled this out, but there are obviously some people arguing that we should, even return to some degree of trade with Russia. And here we have two people who represent, I wouldn't say completely, it's not like they represent both sides of the debate in extremis, but on the one hand you have, you have Federico Benito Dona, who the climate manager.
In energy.
Energy manager from Europa, a big steel association in Brussels. And he represents an industry which is not particularly gas intensive, as he just told me on the seat at the front just there, but obviously relies on gas and is affected by high electricity prices as gas becomes more expensive. And then we have Ugna Kayla-Skater, who sort of comes from the opposite perspective. A climate analyst at Bruegel, who's sort of in her work tends to emphasize the benefits of renewables. So it'll be interesting to see these differences sort of come to the fore. And to start it off, I wanted to say, based on what's happened so far in the last 4 weeks now, however long it's been, well, just over 3 weeks, what would you say this demonstrates most about Europe's sort of energy situation? Does it vindicate those who've been calling for sort of more renewables investment, or do you think it sort of shows that we've been abandoning fossil fuels too quickly?
Who begins?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I think I would like to start in general what those 4 weeks means for the energy security from Europe's perspective, because this crisis is quite different from the one we had in 2022. To flag that out, we can start from 2021, so I'm not going to go into 2022, we all know what happened there. But since 2021, as Commissioner mentioned as well, Europe has done a very successful job when it comes to phasing out Russian energy. So in gas, we had 2/5 of demand of overall imports coming from Russia. Now it's 12%. We have a legally binding obligation to phase that out entirely. When it comes to oil, it was roughly 1/3. Now we have this Druzhba pipeline supplying only Hungary and Slovakia. On coal, it was half that came from Russia before the sanctions. And on uranium, it was roughly 1/3. Now it's a bit more than 1/5. And to do so, Europe turned towards more reliable partners. And I think here it's worth mentioning US specifically. It's quite an interesting case. So in 2024, to give you some numbers across these energy sources, across gas, oil, uranium, and coal, Europe paid $70 billion for US energy imports. And now US supplies roughly 1/4 of EU gas, 1/8 of oil, which is similar to what Norway supplies. On coal, it's also 1/4. On uranium, it's 1/5. But the risk profiles, what the dependency means for when we compare the US and Russia are very, very different. And I would like to give 3 points why that is different. So first of all, the scale. So in terms of magnitude, we rely less on the US than what we relied on Russia back then. The second very important point is that trade is seaborne. So gas is the best example here. It comes in a liquefied form, so it's LNG. It comes by a ship, so it means that suppliers could be more easily changed. So some trade reshuffling within the global market could happen in case at some point something happens and we don't get the US gas. With pipeline, it was different. Turn off in the pipeline means we're cut off instantly, and we needed to build new infrastructure to make sure that we can bring that gas. The third point is interdependence. So when we speak about uranium, US actually depends on Europe for enrichment services, around 40%. And this is even more important as they phase out Russian supplies. The fourth point, it's a bit controversial. It's difficult for me to say what happened politically, but in principle, US companies, they are private companies that operate in competitive markets, different from the case of Russia, where the state exerted control over energy companies. But Europe didn't solve this energy dependence. It changed the character. So now we have the situation in Iran, and it showed exactly what this new character looks like. So Europe relies on Qatari gas only around 8%. But we have a situation in Asia when about 90% of that Strait of Hormuz LNG goes to Asia and satisfies like a third of demand, Asian demands. So we have a situation when this is disrupted. Asian and European buyers are competing for the flexible cargoes. So the risk is not a tap being turned off, but an auction that Europe might not necessarily win, and that would come at a higher price. So we also enter this auction in a quite badly positioned situation. We're entering winter with gas storages that are below the levels what we saw in the previous years. So at the beginning of March, it was roughly a third of storage filled. In some countries, it was even lower. For example, Netherlands, only 10%. So refilling the storage while competing with Asians for some of the supply is going to be quite expensive. So the underlying message here is that as long as we remain reliant on the fossil fuels, we rely on the external suppliers, and we still remain vulnerable to all of these external shocks that are happening.
I mean, that sounds like a very reasonable conclusion. Sorry, that sounds like a very reasonable conclusion to draw from this. I mean, do you vigorously resist that? Or?
No, indeed. First of all, thanks everyone for this invite, this panel, to you as well, to the audience for being here, taking the time to join us in this debate. First of all, I think in this time it's important to clarify one thing. The steel industry is committed more than ever to climate neutrality targets. We are still en route towards decarbonization, and we are strongly supporting the ambitions of the Union to become independent and increase the strategic autonomy across all the relevant the strategic value chains that we have today in Europe. And indeed, as you were hinting at before, we are not that gas intensive compared to other friends in the energy intensive industry ecosystem, but we are indeed electro intensive, globally exposed to international competition, and we are going to become even more electro intensive as we decarbonize via direct and indirect electrification, the beloved fossil free hydrogen that has been a little bit forgotten lately in the current crisis. I think the point my fellow panelist is making, and Mr. Jorgensen has said, it's very clear. Indeed, we need to research and find energy independency within the EU, and we are strongly supporting all the efforts necessary to expand and to become independent via increasing the quality and the quantity of homegrown renewable energy sources and fossil-free energy sources, zero where we marry technology neutrality as well. And that is where the electricity, the gas market crisis that we are witnessing right now, which is different, but it's still a crisis, different intensity, but the dynamics are, for us, since the war in the Ukraine, are the same. How can we, again, rely on, how can we make the case of renewable even stronger, so the case of European Union even more stronger? Well, definitely tapping into the vast amount of renewable electricity and fossil-free electricity that sectors like mine will require over the years.
Could Could I interject quickly? So I think one point of disagreement where maybe sort of pro-environmental, sort of, climate activists would maybe disagree with your position. So like, your industry is supporting decarbonization, like all of them. But so there's this question of the way that electricity is priced in Europe, which is electricity is generally priced by the basically the most expensive plant that's available that's needed to meet demand in a given moment. And generally that's gas in countries, especially in countries where gas sort of like predominates in terms of the energy mix, right? So in Italy, for instance, I think gas overwhelmingly sets the price of electricity, which means that even renewables is much more expensive even when they're generating electricity. But in countries like Spain, it's really low. Renewables which are almost negligible in terms of how much they cost, overwhelmingly set the price there, which means it's much cheaper. So that benefits renewables companies, but it doesn't benefit gas-intensive, not so intensive industries that rely on energy, exactly. And so, based on what I understood about your position, I mean, you're in favor of some kind of review of this system,
indeed,
right?
Indeed.
Whereas, not so much for you.
Not so much.
Could I start with your position on this, because?
Yeah, of course. And please feel free to stop me if I go into too much detail. But
sure.
In general, like the solution to this problem is that structurally, once we introduce more and more renewables to the system, as you mentioned, with, for example, Spain, 15% of ours, gas sets the price, Italy, 90%, that determines the difference in prices. As we introduce more and more renewables, the electricity prices are going to be lower. And maybe here I can also give you the example with the US, because I think it's sometimes used, this gap between European and US electricity prices to prove that the system is broken. But actually that is not true. There are two main factors why the electricity prices in the US are lower than in the EU, because they also use the marginal pricing, which is, by the way, a common way to price commodities. So it's not only gas, it's also oil, it's airline tickets, it's coffee, it's wheat. So those two things is, first of all, gas in Europe costs 3 times more than in the US. This is explained by the fact that they have domestic generations, we do not. And the second point is carbon taxing. So in the US, they don't have it. In the EU, we do, which drives this transition towards renewable generation, as we agreed, which is the solution in the long term for us to have a domestically generated source to be independent. So if you change the marginal pricing, those two things, they remain untouched. So it doesn't solve the underlying problem. And then we can also...
Can I just interject? I just want to, one major upshot of changing this system is that, renewables companies benefit when energy is more expensive because of this system. So if gas is really expensive and it drags the price of renewables up, they profit and they can reinvest those profits in expanding their own businesses. So it underpins billions of euros in sort of green investment planning as well, and supports the green industry.
This change between the price and the generation of the plant, it pays off for the investment, because renewables are more expensive to set up. For the gas, for example, the fuel is more expensive.
If I may, on the other side of the coin, at the same time, you have all heard the several plant closures in many electro-intensive sectors across Europe. I mean, I would mention mine, but there are many others out there. There are numbers from different sources testifying that the rate and the pace of electrification in Europe is stagnating for several years, and it only got worse since the coupling of fossil fuel prices and electricity prices became evident as an issue, when we realized that the cost of commodity setting the price skyrocketed from the original price that we had before the invasion. This is testifying one thing, that indeed we are putting more renewables, maybe, I don't know how much, relatively to what. We are putting more renewables in the energy system, but then the benefits of the low-cost technologies that they represent and that we have so strongly fought for all these years are not directly translating in lower total energy cost for industrial consumers. I mean, and the problem is that as Mr. Jürgen said, indeed, decoupling of prices is the target. What we are saying in the steel sector is that Europe has to take the time to impact assess to what extent these pricing system and this current market design can or cannot deliver on all the components of this energy transition. Because it's clear that there is a situation of energy leakage materializing in Europe of strategic industrial sectors such as us. And there is this clear evidence, as the Joint Research Centers modeled back in 2023, that we will not depart the price coupling anytime soon, meaning we are going to have the impact of gas-fired power plants on wholesale prices well beyond 2035, in times where we need to be placed in to be put in a position to consume and to procure as much as possible fossil-free capacity in Europe. And right now,
can I put this to Ungar?
Yes.
I mean, so when you hear the words impact assessment, I mean, is that ominous to you? Does that sound like a dangerous thought, or is that something you'd welcome, or does that sound like you're trying to open the door to sort of really, structural changes?
I think the main issue with this, I'm not against the impact assessment at all, but that all of the other options are probably worse than what we have now when it comes to pricing the system. So there is this idea of market split proposal, so that you would have renewables separated from fossil fuels into two different segments, and then you price them differently, but this leaves a lot of questions that are actually not answered. So first of all, who would get access to the cheap electricity and who would be forced to pay more? Then there is this question of cross-border trade. So if we apply it to one country, what does it mean when it comes to trade with the neighbors? Like, European system is integrated, so would the other countries get access to the cheap one? Would they not? If we apply it across the whole Europe, how we coordinate that? And maybe the third point, the most important one, is the balancing markets. So this is a very hard problem. So in a grid operator, at any moment, it has to match the supply and demand exactly. So the balancing markets respond to one price signal across the whole market. If we separate it into two, how is it going to be managed? And then also the questions of which segment really absorbs like a sudden drop in the wind output, or which segment pays for the generation of the backup gas plant. And I think the very important point here is also changing the system. It would undermine the first movers, those who invested early on to decarbonize. So this is not the message that we want to send. So the laggards should not be rewarded for moving too slow when it comes to responding to the changing world.
I mean, do you want to address that directly?
I think these are wonderful observations. These are wonderful observations. No, I don't disagree at all. I'm just saying, let's move this discussion from a theory, policy debate, into a proper, valid impact assessment. We take 6 months, 7, 8 months, a third-party independent consultant sit down for the commission, we carry out and we measure whether all these, because these are valuable, as energy expert myself, of course, this is what we are saying. Let's quantitatively and qualitatively measure what happened, because maybe at the end we're going to come up with a positive solution, which is striking the right balance between rewarding and providing investment signals for the renewable energy sector, which needs to get its revenue streams, and us, who needs to deliver the strategic value, the strategic goods that this economy needs, especially in times in the world where geopolitics is not anymore, we cannot anymore rely on 100% as before. So that's what we are saying. Let's move these questions to a proper place at the commission level. We impact assess it.
And if the impact assessment says everything's great, let's keep the system as is, you'll be like, that's fine, and you won't.
We believe something can come up out of it. We believe that we might see some problems in it. I don't hide you that. But again, it allows the Commission to have a proper outlook of what the problem really is, what are the drivers, what can be sacrificed or not. Because ultimately, Europe has decided with the Strategic Industrial Accelerator Act and so on and so forth, we have decided that we are going to keep energy-intensive industries in Europe. Then we have an energy dilemma that needs to be solved, and we need to do it in a proper way. Now, of course, let's weigh the energy package that has been promised now after the UCO summit on the 12th of February, and with the Council conclusion on the 20th of March, and let's sit down and see. But let's take the time, because we have never done this since the invasion of Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2021. We were there in the debate, and there was simply no time. Commission had 3 months 3 months only to assess the market design and find alternative. And we don't believe you can find alternative to such a complex system that we have taken so much time to build on in 3 months' time. But
I mean, Unga, hypothetically, are there any conceivable changes to that system that you would sort of welcome, or if not welcome, that you wouldn't sort of, really worry about?
For me, it's hard to see the actual change. I think we need to preserve the signals that encourage decarbonization. And I think overall, we also have this issue, I agree with even the data. There is a lack of transparent data, what the industry pays when it comes to electricity. So, for example, a steel maker, the price that it faces, it depends on network charges, on levies, on bilateral contracts, on tax exemptions. All of this differs across member states. At the moment, it's also published in different places, different formats. We don't collect it as a single data source. So having an institution that would give visibility on this would also allow us to have a better debate and also to have a better policy outcomes for this. So the US already has the Energy Information Administration, and we need the equivalent of something like European Energy Agency as well to have this data.
So I guess you're both in favor of some kind of external review process, but for different purposes. I mean, you want to show that the system works, and you want to show that.
Well, me, I'm just a customer asking for my necessary commodity I cannot do without. Let's remember, electricity are not coffee beans.
Yeah.
There is a very inelastic demand to face, and the alternative of closing down is not just a market behavior that nobody wants to wish.
Closing thoughts with 5 seconds.
I enjoy it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think also we have this changing world, and I really hope that also the industry makes effort to adapt to it in the best way, but we need more data to base the solutions and the policy on.
Indeed.
I think it's over. I mean, I'm waiting for marching orders. I mean, if it's not, are there any questions from the audience? Wait, is it good? Are we good? Okay. So sorry. So next on stage, we have. Hang on. We have Politico's senior policy editor Jan Chensky, who will be discussing the bloc's energy policy in an exclusive interview with the European Commissioner for Defence and Space, Andrius Kubilius, and that will be at 4:40 p.m. So 20 minutes.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
We are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies, discussing this all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
You